Hi, everyone, and welcome to Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. I'm Dan Drake, and I'm joined with my friends and co-hosts, Jeannie Batoni and Tim Stein. Unfortunately, Wendy Conquest isn't able to join us today, but we will journey on without her today. Today, we're going to talk about actually really important but a difficult conversation. We're going to talk about abuse, healing trauma, coercive control. We have a special guest, Tabitha Westbrook, joining us, and I'm curious your guys' thoughts and what you're looking forward to for this talk.
I having worked so many years with survivors of sex abuse and sex assault, and then it's one of those passions for me as I came into betrayal trauma and sex addiction of healthy sexuality and healing that sexual impact for betrayed and addicted. So this is like way up my wheelhouse. I'm really excited and really thrilled to see her book and kind of get into it. So I'm feeling eager for Tabitha. Tim?
What about you,
I
Tim?
I am right there with you, Jeannie. The looking at the trauma lens, which we have done for so many years, but for the addict and for the partner and the impact and all that stuff. But what I really love about this is not just addressing that, but so much of her book is about, and what does that healing journey look like, and how do we move from where you are to where you want to be. And I'm really looking forward to sort of hearing a little bit about what that healing journey and what options she sort of sees as helpful along that healing journey might be.
Hmm.
Love it. Well, shall we bring Tabitha on?
Let's
Let's
do
bring
it.
her on.
Come on, Tabitha.
Hey,
Hi,
magic.
Welcome. Nice to have you.
great to
So
be
I'm
here.
gonna
Thank you for having
show
me.
I'm gonna show your book, and this is fantastic. You just came out.
Again, what's the name of it for
Oh yeah,
people who can't see
I'm gonna I'm
visual?
gonna read it because I don't want to miss any words. There's a lot, and it's so Body and Soul, Healed and Whole is the name of the book. Subtitle is an invitational guide to healthy sexuality after trauma, abuse, and coercive control.
So Tabitha, how did this book come to be?
So it's actually a really interesting conversation on that part and how it happened. I got a call from the head of a ministry that I partner with, and she said, Tabitha, we need to talk about sex with the survivors. And I thought that sounds like fun. And so I said yes, ultimately. But more than any other thing I've ever done, anything I've ever taught, this wrote me first because I also am a survivor. And I remember feeling and holding the weight of this
Mhm.
topic as I was talking in that session with these women. And also, we gave them the opportunity to ask questions and to write them down because we know it's hard to say things out loud sometimes. And I ended the day with this pile of questions and going, oh my gosh, like we need so much more than just a teaching at a retreat. We need an entire book. And I was already talking with a publisher and I reached out to them and said, I think we need to write about sex. And they said, okay. And they were down for it. And that is how we got the book. And it has been quite the journey of not only including parts of my own story of healing, but also stories from clients and women over the years that I've worked with and then seeing it out in the wild and how it's impacting people now.
What are
Mhm.
you seeing from it, from the impact?
It has given people words they didn't have. And that has been such a gift to hear, where I've had women come up to me and say, I didn't know how to say this. And you gave me the words, or you told my story, or I didn't think I'd ever be able to say this out loud. And now I can.
Is this book specifically written for women and or is
It
or
is. It's specifically faith-based women, but I do think it applies to everyone. I've actually had a lot of men read it, which I thought was really interesting. And they have gotten so much out of it and said, man, there's a lot of my own brokenness that I see in here as well.
I love how in your writing, it's very approachable, it's very compassionate, and I love you said in the subtitle, the invitation. So there's this invitational guide. I just feel like there's encouragement, but there's a lot of choices people can make. I don't know, I just find it really thoughtful and compassionate in your approach, which of course is needed given the subject matter you're talking about. So beautifully done.
Thank you. And it's so important, particularly in faith-based spaces. There are so many let me smack you over the head with a Bible spaces. And that is not exactly what I find conducive to healing, especially deep harm like sexual assault and sexual abuse. So I really wanted people to feel safe to open the pages. Especially women in the church have had so many negative things said about their sexuality, sexual desire, all of those things, that I wanted them to feel like, oh, this is something I can talk about. It is safe to say this. And for women's ministry leaders and pastors to have a tool, because I don't think they always know how to talk about it either.
Well, I even when the chapter is too afraid to ask answers to questions about sexuality, I mean, just putting it out there, let's just talk about it. Let's have this conversation about something that's really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just thinking of the folks who are not necessarily faith-based, the secular community. How would you suggest they come into this book? Because I wonder if they would say like, okay, this is a book for me. And I think the information in the book, just to be clear, is phenomenal. And it's not necessarily dependent upon the faith piece. The faith adds in my mind. But how do you see the secular community opening the book?
Well, I hope that they open it like normal people and just like open the book. But I think it's important to understand that there is a faith-based context to it. And I do talk about scripture in it. I want to be really upfront. That's one of the things that criticism that I have heard from people about things like divorce care when they don't realize that that is a Christian event. And so they go in hoping for care and maybe they aren't ready for what's happening. And I am so well aware that people in the secular arena have sometimes been very hurt by the church. And I just want to be very, very clear about what's in the book because I don't want someone to pick it up and go, oh, I thought this was just going to be this one thing. And here we are talking about Jesus. And what are we going to do with that? So I am not a take two verses and call me in the morning kind of girl, first of all. I am very well aware of spiritual abuse and fight actively against it in every context I can. And so the way that I approached it in the book is from that faith-based perspective, but not with a let me bludgeon you with a Bible kind of deal. Like, it's really like, hey, let's use really good neuroscience and really good embodied practices that I believe God completely condones and help you heal. So if you can read through things that talk about scripture and that sort of thing, then I think the book can still be very accessible no matter where you are. I just want to be very, very clear though, because I don't like people feeling like, oh, she bait and switched me. I just think there's enough of that junk out there and I'm not that girl.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, thank you.
I remember reading in the book, take two verses, call me in the morning kind of a thing. And I was like, oh, this is somebody I'm going to want to talk more and more with. This is great. So I'm so glad you're here.
This is just a question for anyone that hasn't read the book. Well, first of all, who's this book mostly like the ideal reader for your book? So
The
obviously
ideal reader,
Christian.
yeah, it would be a Christian woman who has had some sort of sexual harm, whether that is sexual abuse in childhood, sexual assault at any point in life, or sexual abuse within an abusive marriage or partnership. And I like to cover that last one because there are churches out there that teach that you cannot be raped once you are married because your yes was at the altar, which is utterly ridiculous. And so I actively include that as a reader because I think she needs to know that that's not okay. And so it is geared toward women. But again, I've had a lot of men read it. If you look at the endorsements, there's a fair number of men that endorsed it, actually, both therapists and pastors and speakers, because they understand the need and they understand that this does happen for men as well. I didn't write to men, but I do think men could get something out of it. And, because the harm that happens to our bodies is pretty universal.
What about partners? So not all partners have experienced sexual assault, and yet there's definitely a betrayal that impacts often their sexuality. Are they going to find their story, or are they going to find aspects of their own experience in this book?
I absolutely think so. I mean, I think, working with both addicts and betrayed partners, right? So the betrayer and the betrayed, there is so much harm, right? Because we know that people don't fall into the realm of sex addiction and compulsive sexual behaviors and problematic sexual behaviors because things are great, right? It's usually a trauma response, it's symptomatic. And so, there's probably some deep harm in some way that's underneath of that. And all of the exercises in the book are great for any kind of trauma. They are geared definitely toward body-based, experiential bottom-up therapy, which is something I'm very passionate about, but anyone could do them for sure. And betrayal trauma is such a deep trauma. So let's say that you are the betrayed partner. Let's say your partner has been acting out and has been, doing compulsive sexual behavior and struggling. That's going to have a sexual impact on you. I have yet to meet a betrayed partner who's like, "Are you sure it's not me?" Like, what was I not enough? Was I not good looking enough or beautiful enough? Was I not doing the right things in the bedroom? Or, oh my gosh, I was asked to do these things. I was videotaped. Things were put on the dark web. Our kids' college fund is gone. Like, there's a lot. And so there's these deep, deep trauma in their bodies that I think a lot of this book could absolutely speak to.
You used a term in there, bottom up therapy for trauma. For our listeners who are unfamiliar with that, can you talk about the difference between top down versus bottom up trauma healing, and specifically why do you think it's so helpful when it comes to healing sexual trauma?
So let's, I'll start with the bottom up versus top down. So we have to understand our brains kind of in a couple of parts. We have our thinky parts and our feely parts. Our thinky parts are our prefrontal cortex, where all of our logical thought, chronology, all of that stuff lives up front in the brain. And our feely parts are all in the back, in our amygdala and our hippocampus and all of those places. And that is where trauma sits, is in the feelies. And if we don't address the feelies and also the thinkies, we need them both. But if we don't start with the feelies in the back and the bottom, then we're not going to get very far. So if anybody's ever sat with a traumatized individual and said, "Tell me your story," right? What do you want to share with me? We get it out of order. It's like, "Well, no, you know what? This really happened when like little Timmy was 10 and now he's 73." And like, so there's a lot of lack of chronology in getting that. And that's because it's coming from, that back part where there isn't time and space. And so if we don't start there and we don't start in our bodies where a lot of the sensations are kept and held and the experience is held, Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, comes to mind because it does, then we are trying to think our way out of something we need to feel our way out of. And we need our thinky parts. Like I said, there is such good value in understanding and naming. That's all a thinky part. But if we don't start with, there's this feeling and I don't know what to do with it, or there's this body sensation that comes up every time I talk about what happened to me, or they're struggling under the immense weight of shame, which is very physical, then we're not going to get to healing because we're just trying to think our way out of it. If we could think our way out of trauma, literally none of us would have a job.
And trauma would be so easy and quick to be healed and resolved.
It would.
Yeah. Right,
Can you, that was something I at the end of each chapter, I like that you have embodiment practices and some real practical things. For those, again, that may not have read it yet, can you give a couple examples, or at least one example of a practice that someone could engage in that might be helpful to kind of get reconnected with their body and more embodied practice?
Yeah. One of my favorite ones to do with folks is called havening. And it is basically kind, comforting self-touch. It's kind of rooted in polyvagal theory, which basically is our safety system inside. And that, for someone who has been sexually harmed and their body has been harmed, that can be very dysregulating, but ultimately very healing because they're not used to kind touch. They're not used to having someone, including themselves, orient gently to themselves. And so it's a very invitational and gentle way to enter into what safe touch is. And havening is basically just gentle stroking of body parts, which that's, for people listening, they're going to be like, "That sounds a little terrifying." And I promise it is not. But, one example might be starting at your hairline on your face and stroking downward across your face and doing that a few times. And the first time you do it, it might be really scary. You might go, "I'm feeling things I didn't expect to feel, and I feel a little bit off kilter." The first time I did anything like this myself, and I told the story in Body and Soul Healed and Whole, I had to sit down. I didn't know if I was going to be okay. My body was like, "What is happening?" Because I hadn't had kind touch. And so my body didn't know what to do with it. And it took some practice. And that's why all of the embodied practices are exactly that. They're practices. Because we need to practice. We will never be perfect. We will always have the opportunity to exit our window of tolerance, sometimes at a high rate of speed. And we'll have to bring ourselves back in. And so we want to give ourselves grace and space for all of those things.
Mm. You're highlighting for me and reminding me of the acceptance of slow and the acceptance and welcoming, inviting of go my pace. And what does that bring up for me? Because bringing in safe touch, when you say, caressing body parts, people go to sex. And that's not what we're talking about in the first stages of healing. That's not what we're talking about. But just having touch that's safe by self or other, that's a major deal for someone who's had their body betrayed in whatever violent or sexual way. And so reminding listeners, this is not a book of do it this way and you'll be all good. It's go your pace, feel what's right for you, try things out, slow down. Maybe that wasn't right today. Maybe it could be right tomorrow. And the somatic piece is so important. I just was like wanting people to remind themselves, slow, there's no time on this. Go what works for you. Because that's honoring the internal system instead of having to push past and persevere, which we know as trauma folks, like that reinforces the trauma. So
Mhm.
we don't want you to push past or push through or, I'll just buckle up and get through this. It's not what we're trying to do when we're doing healing work. Are we on agreement here, Tabitha? I
Absolutely.
see, I see you nodding, and I was like,
Absolutely.
yeah, okay.
When we do trauma work, one of the things that often happens is that, as the therapist is walking somebody in to sort of like address and sort of work on their trauma, it's not unusual that they will bump up to things that they are realizing are traumatic that they had always just thought of as that's just what people go through. I went through that. It doesn't impact me anymore. And they don't really think about it as being traumatic and still having an impact on them. Or sometimes they don't even really even think about it as having been traumatic in the first place. I'm wondering, in the work that you've done and in some of the stuff that you've written about, is there a typical type of experience that people are surprised with how much it is impacting them, or they thought that it was just nothing in the background, and suddenly they're sitting with it, and it really has a lot more energy than they thought it was?
I would say almost every trauma survivor that's ever sat across from me in my office has had something like that happen.
Hmm.
A lot of times folks come in and say, I'm a little anxious and I don't know why, or I'm feeling kind of sad. And you start going through history and asking some questions, and you end up hearing a horrific story that they tell you with a completely flat affect, like it is news, sports, and weather. And you're like, there we are. That's really interesting. And you start, kind of pulling on those threads a little bit and inviting them to notice. What is it like when you tell me that story? Gosh, I hear you tell me that, you know, your brother died in this car accident and you were a witness. You know, tell me about that. What was that like for you? And sometimes they'll go, I don't want to talk about that. And sometimes they'll just pause. And, as you invite them deeper into that, and really, like, this is work you have to do from that relational perspective, because no one's going to tell you anything unless you're safe to tell, right? Our neuroceptive systems, are like checking out radar system to make sure everybody's safe, is going to be constantly on when somebody's been traumatized. So they have to read you as safe, which means you have to be in your own body, incidentally, if you're a therapist.
Mhm.
And then inviting them into that place to tell the story and have the experience and let their bodies go with them in it is sacred space. So it's a variety of experiences. It can be a loss, it can be a betrayal. So many women that I've worked with say, well, isn't it just this way? Isn't this what sex is supposed to look like? And you go, no. Actually, it should be mutually pleasurable. It should be enjoyable. You shouldn't be forced to do things that you don't want to do, that you don't feel good about in a time you don't feel good about. And that can be a devastating moment for someone when they realize the
Mhm.
weight of what they just told you. And
Mhm.
to give that sacred space of being in there, I feel like in some ways it's holy ground, where I have been given this privilege of walking this person into a different understanding, and I want to take that seriously, and I want to be that safe place for them to do that.
Mhm.
It's I think I took some of that for granted when I first became a therapist. I'll just be honest. I thought, well, my job is to be there and people will talk to me and open up and be vulnerable and whatever, I can help them heal. I think I took it for granted a lot more. The more years I've done this, like you said, there's something sacred when someone's willing to trust me enough to share their pain or their trauma or their experiences. I love how you said that and how vital that is to the process of our clients feeling safe with us. And I think that you said it. I feel like for anyone listening, I've had plenty of people that I've talked to that aren't sure about their therapist, or they're not sure, the space they're in. And I think that piece of feeling really safe and to open up and having that person actually provide that atmosphere is so important. You said it really well.
And I think, like, Jeannie, like what you were saying earlier about the slow, right? So especially if you're a younger in the profession therapist, there's a lot of our own junk that we bring in, right? Because we take ourselves everywhere that we go. And so we might say, oh, I need them to get the value out of this. I need to feel like they got a value add. So here's 75 interventions and 400 worksheets. And the client is like, I just need you to be with me. Like, what are we doing? And so when I'm training therapists, I'm encouraging them start with what I call the ministry of presence, right? This is self of therapist. This is creating that therapeutic relationship so someone can tell you. And yeah, that means you go a little bit slower. Like, I don't want to throw an intervention out there if I don't know you. I want to know what makes you you first. I want to know why you're sitting across from me. What made you make that phone call or send a text or send an email and come in? And man, if they are under the age of 30 and they made an actual phone call with their lips and audio and didn't just send in the online form, like, we know that took some courage. And so I want to just honor the courage that someone had to come sit across from me in the first place. And I want to know about them before I start fixing them, which incidentally also isn't your job as a therapist. And, really inviting, okay, what can we do here together? It's very collaborative. And when people feel heard and seen, then they are safe to open up. I think about Kurt Thompson, who is a neuropsychiatrist, and he says, we come into the world looking for someone looking for us. And we do. And I want to be looking for you when you sit across from me.
That's great. Can we go in a different direction? Because I'm curious. Can we talk about faith and Christianity and the faith-based part of this for a second? Yeah. But first, I want to just remind everyone you're listening to Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships, and we're having a really lovely conversation about a really difficult conversation or topic. So with faith and Christianity, what do you see as the areas the church is getting it when addressing sexuality trauma for survivors, and where are they missing it?
They know people have sex. I think that might be where they understand the most.
Okay, so that's a low bar. Okay, all right.
There are churches out there that do a good job. So I don't want to broad brush the entire evangelical landscape and all of Christendom. I don't want to do that. But working in the work that I work in, I see quite a few churches really struggle with lots of things. I think there has been over time poor teaching, poor understanding, and a lot of fear. And instead of let's be curious, let's be invitational, I don't know, look like Jesus, there's been a lot of struggle and like, here, let me give you some rules. And so I think it's been a bit of a struggle. I do think churches are starting to understand, and there are really good ministries out there that are doing great work, like Pure Desire Ministries. Nick Stumbo, who heads that up, I believe, is a pastoral sex addiction professional. And they tend to bring on CSATs as their, counselors, which I fully appreciate. And I've had the opportunity to talk with him, and he is a wonderful guy. So I think the church is working toward goodness, but it's a little bit behind some other areas in some ways. And I think they get stuck in the adages of purity culture. And that really pits men and women against each other, which is deeply problematic. So instead of seeing each other as image bearers of the living God, we see each other as conquest or, perpetrator in some ways. So men are told frequently in evangelical Christianity, you are nothing more than your lust. And you have to be gate kept because otherwise you'll just go having sex with everyone or looking at porn. Women are told you're responsible for all of that. And so what you wear, what you do, how you act is going to determine whether or not the man sins. And that also isn't true because the Bible is very clear that you are responsible for your own sin. It says if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. And if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Now, Jesus is not saying actually go do that. He's saying take it seriously and handle your stuff. And so the church has really distorted that and then created this situation where instead of brothers and sisters, which is what we're supposed to be as men and women, we become enemies. And that, I think, is being borne out in what the incidences of addictive behaviors and compulsive behaviors we're seeing in men and the harm that we're seeing for women overall in the church. And I think that that is deeply problematic and a place I would very much like to see the church continue to grow and change and not stay stuck in because it's so harmful for everybody.
Yeah, I know, and I've had conversations offline about this, and it's yeah, I think it's a big problem. Are you seeing any shifts? Because purity culture, I feel like I don't know when it started, but a while ago. And in terms of those messages, do you see any like, what's the hope? What's the hope and change?
The hope is I am seeing more people willing to talk about it. The fact that the biggest Christian publisher published my book is, I think, indicative of that.
Okay.
Because that was something that, would be a risk for them, right? Like if it wasn't worth doing. And I think we're seeing more people talk about it within the church. Sheila Gregoire's The Great Sex Rescue was kind of the, initial crack to that purity culture foundation when evangelical women, she interviewed 20,000 of them. That is really big survey data. So if you are a research nerd like I am, that's solid research, right? That's a high N, and that's what you want. And found out a ton of things, and it started changing the languaging in the church itself, which is wonderful. So I think that we're seeing good things. I think it's a lot slower than I'd like, and there's still such tragedy. As we're recording this, there was a death of a very prominent survivor in the Christian church who had come out against a professor that had sexually abused her and lost her job. She was in a very high profile, high executive position within a large denomination. And she ended up losing that. And she ended up losing her life because at the age of 47, she died of a series of strokes. And it's directly related to the harm that she endured. And we see, there's another prominent Christian artist that made a confession recently about their sexual behaviors toward young men. And this individual said they went to treatment, but there's no discussion of the victims in that in a meaningful way in their confession. There's, I've been clean and sober, and my question was from what? Was it the substances? Was it sex addiction? I have questions. And so I think that there's still a lot of work to be done, and there's still a lot of casualties to be sifted out. And for every one that is a high profile case, there are thousands that are not. And that's an important thing to remember, that this is deeply problematic. Pure Desire commissioned a Barna study last year, and it's fantastic. If people want to go get it, you can go to Pure Desire's website, and I think you can buy it there. And it really shows the incidence and use of pornography in the church. And it is real high. And it's grown amongst women, which I think is another thing that we really need to be aware of, is that, it may not look quite the same way as it does for men, but erotic fiction's a whole thing.
Oh
And
boy.
it's a big thing. And it's growing. And when you see middle school girls walking around with some of these books and you're like, oh gosh, then we need to probably have some conversations about what's really happening and how are we languaging the beauty of sex, because sexual intimacy, sexual intercourse is a beautiful thing. I think the four of us here would absolutely believe that, just based on the work we do and helping people heal. And I would love to see people really be able to embrace that in a beautiful way that isn't harmful to them.
Mhm. I want to put a plug in here for if you are a listener who is also a provider, the Sexual Integrity Leadership Summit that happens every year, the SILS Summit, because that's really focusing on sexual issues and mental health and addiction and betrayal. And they are really trying to get the word out in a really positive way. And so that organization, again, is SILS, Sexual Integrity Leadership Summit. Happens every year.
Tabitha, as we're getting closer to the end here, I'm curious, for those that are, let's say we have a listener that's just starting their healing from trauma, what are some of the things that you would suggest for them kind of out the gate to start with?
Sexually?
Kindness toward yourself.
So are you asking her focusing on sexuality there, Dan?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
I would say kindness toward self. Like that's the first place to start. This is hard,
What are
right?
3 things that they could do to embrace kindness to themselves?
Hmm.
That's a tricky thing for every survivor, right? Every struggler, because the thing that you do the best is abuse yourself. Frankly, we're real good at that as survivors. But the first thing is to know that you need to, and to wrestle with the fact that you might not believe that you need to. This is especially for faith-based folks, depending on how you grew up and the, type of doctrine and theology that you have had. That can be really difficult. There's a lot of folks that have been told, your heart is desperately wicked, you can't ever know it, and all you deserve is death and hell, which are both distorted. And if anybody ever wants to know why, I can give you a very long exegesis on that is hermeneutically correct. But that said, really going, how does God see me if you're faith-based? Because he doesn't look at you like you're scum, right? Like I think Ephesians chapters 1 through 3 is one of my favorites. That's called the indicative, right? So Ephesians is split. Welcome to theology with Tabitha. Ephesians is split into 2 big parts. One is the indicative and the other is the imperative. And anytime you see those 2 things, indicative, who you are, always comes before imperative, what you do. And so when you look at that, you find that you are God's workmanship, that you are created. The word is poema, which is a poem, your artwork. And if that is how God sees you, and that's how you're created, and even if you don't believe in God and you're listening to this going, oh, dear Lord, why is she quoting scripture? You are still like a work of art. You are still someone who has value and worth and is worthy of good and kindness.
Yeah.
And so if you can start there and say, I would say this to my best friend and believe it for them, why am I different? That might be the best starting point.
As you're talking about that, what comes up for me is the idea of affirmations, which affirmations are typically not statements that we believe; they're statements that we want to believe. And oftentimes, when I'm working with my clients and I'm suggesting affirmations, they don't really believe that they're true yet. And so, what I hear you saying is that idea of you just lean into the idea that, well, maybe this might be true. I don't know that I believe it. And you don't have to believe it to start that work of I'm enough, I'm lovable, I am God's creature, I'm a work of art. Pick whatever resonates with you, but just start leaning in and open up the door that maybe that's possible. And maybe you don't even feel like it's possible. Maybe it's just like, I don't think it's possible, but I'll just say it to myself because my stupid therapist is telling me to.
I've had clients have that for sure. They're like, I did it because you told me to, and it was helpful. And I'm like, yay, thank you for that. Thank you for trusting me to try it. Um, what you're saying really brings up for me one of my favorite dialectical behavioral therapy interventions of all time, and that is opposite action.
Mhm.
And that is essentially fake it till you become it. And so with opposite action, you take something that is true now. Opposite action does not work. And I talk about this in Body and Soul, Healed and Whole. If you say, I'm going to become an NBA star, I am 5'2" and fluffy. I am not going to become an NBA star. I'm not dunking a basketball and I'm not running from anything unless it's a bear. And even then that's sketchy. So let's be real here, right? That would not be reasonable opposite action. I'm going to know I'm a liar, but I can say, I know I'm lovable. There is enough evidence. I would say this to a friend, who has the same story as me. And so I will act as if that is true with my whole self. So I'm going to walk out into get my mail, even as if I am the most lovable person on the planet. So I'm going to walk to the mailbox thinking I am lovable. And what would my body do in that space? How would she function? Well, she'd probably stand up a little straighter. So if I'm used to walking kind of with my shoulders in, which a lot of women do, in particular, women tend to make themselves smaller, then, I'm going to like put my shoulders back. I'm going to walk up tall. I'm going to walk with purpose and my head held high. And I'm going to notice, how does that feel in my body? And I'm going to keep doing that until it becomes more and more normal. And I'm going to be very intentional about that. Another exercise that's really helpful is thanking your body parts. And this is tricky when you have had sexual assault and sexual abuse. And so I encourage folks usually to start with something a little less activating, like your hands, unless that's activating. Again, you're going to know your body. Something not activating for me might just absolutely throw you for a loop. And I want to honor that. But let's say your hands are not overly activating. Man, hands, I thank you so much for being able to pick things up and, put on my socks and all of these other things that, hands can do for us. And I can honor my hands. And then you get progressively more challenging until it's thank you, breasts, for being what nurse my child, what can bring me sexual pleasure, all of those things. And there's probably some people in the audience when I said breasts and then described them and thanked them have just fallen out. And I want to just honor that maybe that's not where you are, but eventually it's good to get there.
Which kind of leads me a question, final question I was thinking is, when a reader's reading through your book, where do you hope, everyone's journey is going to be different, but what do you hope they walk away with after finishing your book?
I hope they walk away with care and kindness, especially toward themselves. I hope they walk away feeling like somebody sees them and hears them, even if I can't lay my eyeballs on them, that they know that they're not alone in this, because that is one of the biggest things of harm. Trauma isolates us, and we tend to go inside because we think we're not worthy of having anything. And so I really want folks to feel seen and cared for, and that they matter and their life matters.
And
Thank you
Jeannie,
so
any
much.
final thoughts?
No, thank you so much for being here and for writing the book. I've certainly loved meeting you and talking about this. This is an important topic.
Thank you guys for having me.
I appreciate your courage too. So thanks for putting this out there to the world. It's such a gift to the world, Tabitha. Thank you for such a difficult conversation and difficult topic, but so needed.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So thanks everybody for joining us today. Please subscribe, like, and pass to anyone that you feel would benefit. We would love to have your support. So thanks for joining us. If you have we have a mailbag episode that we do. So if you have any questions or things that you'd like us to address, please feel free to email at conversations.sar@gmail.com. Did I get that right, Sam?
You did. Nice job.
Impressive.
I'm getting it. We'll get there. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Bye, everyone.